Hello and welcome to the CX Files podcast. I'm your host, Mark Hillary. This week we're focusing on emotion, engagement, and how brands are really connecting with their customers. Ian Jacobs is a principal analyst at Forrester Research, based in San Francisco, California. His focus is customer service and digital transformation, so he's well placed to comment on the way that brands are using technology to try improving CX. In the interview, Ian explores automation, chatbots, smart speakers, and how to manage emotion in the brand-to-customer interaction. Okay, let's go straight to the interview. We were talking about a number of subjects, but I think what we were focusing on is this human versus digital question in CX and how this changes customer engagement. And one of the areas that I've been thinking about a lot is smart chatbots, powered by artificial intelligence. They're becoming more and more common. We're seeing a lot of brands using them, but we often see brands just switching from a human contact center straight over to bots without any kind of transition. And they often make it really hard to access a person when the bot doesn't understand a question. So what's going wrong here? Why are so many brands just sort of jumping over?
Well, there are a couple of different issues that are hitting at the same time. But the biggest culprit here is contact centers are still thinking like contact centers, and the metrics by which they're being judged are efficiency metrics or cost takeout metrics. And so they're looking at automation as yet another way to help them reduce costs. And they're not thinking about this in a more holistic or experiential way. And so you end up with chatbots being rushed out before they're really ready for prime time. And you end up with these, pardon the language, but crappy experiences. If you think about the promise of this technology, right? The big new thing here is not just things like natural language understanding, it's machine learning promising that these tools are going to improve themselves over time. And if you're a brand, you think, oh, great. So we can do something like a minimum viable product, throw it out there, it will learn and get better. If I'm looking at that from a customer experience point of view, and I'm sure you could think this through too, Mark, what is that actually saying? It's saying, let's provide a really substandard experience for our early adopter customers in order to get better experiences for the customers use it later on. And that's a bargain I sure as heck wouldn't make, but brands are making that. So I think the biggest driver there is simply wrongheadedness in how they're approaching this. They're not looking to say, how do we create new and exciting experiences? Not saying, how do we figure out how to test these things without, testing it on the backs of our customers or early customers. And so you end up with these poor experiences. But, it doesn't have to be this way. There are obvious ways that you can experiment on other populations other than your customers to get it right. You can design these things for things that aren't just about taking cost out of the business, but creating better experiences for your customers, but also, frankly, for your employees and your contact center agents. And we are, frankly, starting to see brands think that way. So I'm actually optimistic. It's true that I'm experiencing the same thing that you are, with just lots of terrible chatbots, but I'm also starting to have conversations with brands saying, maybe we want to use these technologies to start to augment the performance of our human agents, right? And so instead of saying, let's figure out a way to reduce our headcount by 30% over the next 3 years, they say, actually, maybe we want to start having more interactions with our customers, but keeping the same headcount we have. So more of like a cost optimization thought process than like a traditional cost cutting or cost takeout play. So I am optimistic, but I live in the same world you do. I see the same awful experiences that you and everybody else are having. It's just that I'm having those early inklings of conversations where I'm like, oh, maybe there is a light at the end of the tunnel here. Maybe we are starting to change our thinking around it.
That's interesting that you mentioned there about sometimes rolling out a suboptimal experience and hoping it's going to get better. Because there was a big feature just recently in the Wall Street Journal that actually suggested a lot of brands are happy pushing customers to the edge of their patience, just so long as they've got a team that can pull them back before they lose the customer. And that sounds a bit cynical, but is that really what you're seeing? Is that how people are building a strategy?
In some respects, yes. I mean, the Wall Street Journal story was certainly good for creating seismic waves in the industry. So in that in that measure, it succeeded. But I don't think that it's actually accurate to say that that's how we're designing CX strategies broadly. Broadly maybe, but in customer care in particular, no. We're not really thinking about it in those terms. The issue isn't that we're not thinking about it in those terms, it's that we're causing that to happen whether we think about it or not. It may be unintentional. So what am I talking about here? If we're thinking about customer experience broadly, yeah, think about how airlines are trying to figure out just how far they can push customers before they will say, okay, I'm going to think about things other than low cost as the deciding factor about whether I buy a ticket with you or not. So in that retrospect, that perspective, yeah, the Wall Street Journal is right. But if you think about how customer service organizations are designed, particularly large contact centers, it's not that they're thinking about, where can we push customers? It's that they have convinced themselves that customers are actually interested or more interested in self-service than they are in assisted service. And the reason is there are lots of surveys, including ones from Forrester and every other organization out there, where we ask customers, what would you prefer? And they say, well, I don't want to talk to anybody. But and so you take that data and you say, okay, well, let's honor what the customers want, and we will design a system where you don't have to talk to anybody, and so you end up with these awful chatbots. Going back to your last question, but that's not really what that data is necessarily saying. If you dig in, it's saying we don't want the experiences that you've already designed for us that are driven by humans that are really painful, with agents who don't have any power, can't make decisions on their own, right? Or inconvenient because you're only offering me the option of waiting in a long queue to get to a voice-based agent, or sending some kind of email or messaging with a response time of who knows what. But, if you phrase the question slightly differently and say, if in fact you got equally good service from a human being or from self-service, which would you choose? I bet you in a lot of situations, the customers would choose that kind of high-touch experience. If it was as convenient as self-service, available on every channel that you can get self-service today, we might see something different. So I think it's that brands are actually using data to delude themselves and drawing the wrong conclusion from that data, and then driving these sort of how far can we take self-service, which of course frustrates customers, which leads to that article in the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess the real problem here is that engagement with customers today is about a lot more than just that post-purchase call to customer service. Right. So how are the companies that you work with and talk to, how are they actually building emotion and connection into these interactions? Because if we're talking about a lifetime of connection to a brand, then surely they're thinking that these engagements must involve some emotion.
Well, frankly, I think they're not thinking that, but they really should be. Forrester data actually shows that the three biggest drivers of a customer's perception of their experience with the brand, which are essentially ease, effectiveness, and emotion. Emotion is the biggest driver, more so than ease and effectiveness, right? More so than getting the right answer is how getting to that answer made you feel. And I don't know that brands are really recognizing that and driving their CX and customer care processes around that. That said, there are some brands who are tackling this, and you can tackle it from a technological point of view, like what technologies can I use to help my agents recognize the emotion of a post-sale interaction of my salespeople and kind of a pre-sales or discovery phase interaction. But there's also just like, let's put our heads together and think about these processes and how can we redesign the process, forget the technology, to think about emotion. And let me tell you like a real world story here of a brand doing this. It's my favorite of these stories. DBS Bank out of Singapore was rethinking one of their very common processes. So DBS issues credit cards. And one of the most common things that credit card issuers have to deal with are people, cardholders, who either lose their card or have those cards stolen. And then they have to deal with that, right? They have to cancel the card and issue a new card and potentially deal with the fraudulent charges that happen in the interim. Well, DBS recognized that you don't typically just lose or have stolen your credit card. It's usually your wallet or purse that contains much more than just the DBS card. So it's much more of a traumatic experience than they had been dealing with. So what they had been focusing on was creating a very efficient process for you to report the card stolen, for them to cancel the card and then issue a new one. And they said, well, let's actually redesign our processes to take into account this traumatic experience that our customer went through. And so now if you call DBS and say, hey, my card was stolen, the first thing that the agent does is make sure that you're safe, like both physically and emotionally, because some people would get mugged and then call the bank right away because the first thing in their mind is like, oh, I got to make sure nobody uses this card and I'm stuck with the charges, rather than like worrying about the emotional trauma that they just went through. And so the agents can actually help customers report the event to the police. Then they'll walk you through a really efficient process to get a replacement card and so on. And then after they do that efficient process, they go back to this emotional support, and the agents now have a list of phone numbers and links that the customers may need after losing a purse or wallet. Something like, how do I get a new driver's license, right? Things that don't have anything to do with DBS, except that DBS is trying to look out for the emotional well-being of their customers. And they're starting to see that pay off. The customers who go through these traumatic events and then deal with DBS are actually more loyal than the customers who didn't, simply because they're focusing on that emotional component. So what I'm saying here is, yeah, there are technologies like speech analytics and interaction analytics and AI that can help to identify the emotion of an interaction, but we don't even need that. We could just start to recognize our role as brands in the emotional life of customers and try and figure out how to actually focus on that emotional life and help with the emotional issues that our customers are going through when they're going through customer service problems, or when they need to buy, some new part for their air conditioner or whatever it is. We don't have these needs, these post-purchase, pre-purchase needs in a vacuum. They're part of our lives. So when brands can start to recognize that, they really can move the needle on emotion. Are they doing that today? Not so well. Should they be thinking about it? I'm saying that the answer is, heck yeah, this should be a core part of how we think about our interactions with customers.
And we've also changed in recent years, even the channels that we interact with. And one of the most important, very recently, is the smart speakers. But although we've all been putting Alexa and Home into our homes, they don't seem to be actually that useful for customer experience yet. You can switch Spotify on and off, and you can maybe adjust and regulate the heating in your home. But if you ask it to recommend a hotel tomorrow night in Memphis, then it's going to struggle.
Yeah, well, there aren't very many people who do ask it for a hotel tomorrow in Memphis. I mean, my most common use for smart speakers are set a 12-minute timer, right, while I'm cooking, and I need something to time hands-free. So I understand that. Like, brand usage on these things is very low for either sales use cases. There's not very much commerce going on, or customer service. One of the issues is like, who is one of the biggest producers of these speakers? Amazon. So if you are a retailer, Amazon is clearly trying to push more retail through its channels and less through your own bespoke channels, right? So there's that kind of hesitancy of even trying to work with the smart speaker. But we have privacy concerns, right? Like if anybody can talk to the speaker, then you've got to start to figure out a way to insert biometrics into the process and make sure that the person talking to the speaker is the person who is actually allowed to make changes to your bank account and so on. So there are a lot of issues around using the speakers. What I think is actually going to happen, and I'm starting to see happen, is we're starting to see tools available to brands that say, yes, we can create an Alexa skill for you, or the equivalent for a Google Home, right? But that is basically an implementation of this voice-based abstraction of a service process. And what I mean by that is we could take that same service process that you're building up and replace your IVR using the same sorts of skills that you would be building with Alexa. And so what you're doing is essentially write once, deploy not anywhere, but deploy many across many different touch points, so that when customers start to get comfortable with using these smart speakers, maybe when the smart speaker itself disappears and just becomes ambient, it gets built into your house and your office, and you can just say to your home assistant, hey, home assistant, can you cancel my reservations and pay Jim for dinner last night, right? Once we get to that point, the sort of Blade Runner-esque future, then we'll care about smart speakers or whatever their descendants are. But today and tomorrow, it's can we actually create voice-based experiences wherever we may have those, whether that's through the phone calling up a brand, right? So the traditional voice-based 800 number, toll-free number kind of phone call, whether that's voice enabling a website. So you're on a tablet and you're surfing a .com site, and you can start talking to that site, trying to get service from a brand through the site. That's, I think, more realistic of where we're going. I just don't see the Google Home, any of the Alexa-enabled devices becoming a hub for customer service in the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, that's interesting, because I guess that a lot of the CX stuff that we've talked about, from automation to the bots to the AI, I mean, it's all being driven by different emerging technologies. But which areas do you think we will see the most change just in the near future, the next year or two then?
I actually think, so I'm a customer service guy. I've spent my life working in and around contact centers and CRM. And I think the biggest change is actually going to be in the ability to use this technology to technologically augment customer service and inside sales staff in their interactions with customers and prospects. So not in a customer-facing way, but kind of in an internal use case. So as an example, there are like KLM airline, Dutch airline, had a long pilot project that showed great results where they were having chats, web chats with customers. And there was an AI-driven system that's monitoring the chat and making conversational suggestions to the agent, not to the customer, but to the agent. The agent could then, with one click, say, yep, that's a great thing to say to the customer. Or they can say, no, that's just wrong, and type in their own answer, or they can modify the answer. So it's kind of like a chatbot, but human intermediated, like a human in the loop. And the machine learning system is watching the agent's behavior and improving its suggestions. So this goes back to what I started with. This is a way to get these systems to improve without experimenting on your customers. You've got your agents who are knowledgeable because you've trained them, they've interacted with customers. They are training the system and helping the system continuously improve, but they're also improving, right? The performance is improving for new agents. It's like a technological backstop to help them in their speed to proficiency. And for other agents, it's actually providing ready-made text that can just go out to the agents. They don't literally need to type everything. So the average handle time, the interaction time is actually going down. So the brand is saving money. The customers are getting answers more quickly. And the system, the machine learning, is improving the suggestions of the system over time. And so I think that's where we're really going to see the sort of bang for our buck over the next couple of years. Systems like that are designed to expose the emotional content of interactions to our own staff to help them to improve the customer care and allow brands to maintain this kind of high-touch approach to service, but use AI, machine learning, natural language understanding to get better results. So that's where I'm looking for a big change in the next couple of years.
Yeah, so it's the rise of the super agents being supported by all these technologies.
And inside sales, right? The same thing. As outside sales moves more towards inside sales, they look more like contact centers. So yeah, the fundamentals apply, right? The same things. So we'll get better suggestions about what products are actually going to solve the problem that we're trying to solve, and we'll be sold the right thing the first time, so we never need to call in to customer care. Same idea.
Thanks for listening to the CX Files podcast. Please take a moment to review the podcast because this helps other listeners to find it. And if you have any suggestions, then get in touch with me on Twitter or LinkedIn. I'm @Mark Hillary with 2 L's, or just search Google for Mark Hillary.